Hi, I'm Adam Davis. I'm a security technical specialist covering Microsoft Sentinel. Thank you for joining me today. In this session, we'll be discussing the basics of Microsoft Sentinel pricing. We'll break down the pricing model and help you understand how Microsoft Sentinel pricing works and what you can do to reduce costs. Microsoft Sentinel is a cloud-native SIEM and SOAR solution that helps organizations detect, prevent, and respond to threats. The pricing for Microsoft Sentinel is aimed to provide flexibility and scale for any organization, and it's built up of three core areas: ingestion, retention, and automation. When discussing pricing, there is an all-important gigabyte value, which will determine your cost for ingestion and retention, and that's made up of how much data you bring in and how long you decide to keep it for. Before we start on ingestion, understand that Microsoft Sentinel sits on top of Log Analytics and Azure Monitor Service, and Log Analytics is our data platform, and that is where data is being ingested into. I'll be referring to it as Microsoft Sentinel for simplicity. We want to avoid ingesting everything and anything, so when it comes to deciding what data to ingest, we recommend a risk-based approach. Ask yourself 3 questions. What is the risk you want to monitor for? What data do you specifically need for that detection? And once you have detected it, do you have the right data to be able to make a confident decision on how to confirm and remediate the threat? And I'll talk to you about different data ingestion options, log optimization, and commitment tiers. There's multiple ways to ingest data into Microsoft Sentinel. First, we have analytics logs. These are your high-value logs, which are critical for the SOC, and that's the data that they will use for detection rules, referred to as analytic rules in Sentinel. This data is highly available, but it's also the most expensive way of ingesting data, so we want to make sure that we have valid use cases for ingesting it. For the data that you might not need in hot storage, or data that provides less detection value, but is still useful during an investigation, you may consider alternatives to analytics logs. That's why we developed auxiliary logs. Auxiliary is still a new option at the time of this recording, and is still in preview. However, it has the potential to be very beneficial to organizations, so I wanted to make you aware of it. Auxiliary logs are aimed at your mid to low security value data, which won't be used for detections, but will still help during an investigation to give an analyst a more complete picture of what's happening within the environment. For significantly lower cost, auxiliary logs are kept within interactive retention for 30 days before going into long-term storage state. Data ingested via auxiliary logs can still be queried via summary rules while within interactive retention, or via search jobs when it's gone into long-term storage. I'd recommend reading our learn.microsoft.com documentation to find out more about its capabilities and considerations. Lastly, we have basic logs. Basic logs perform a similar function to auxiliary logs. However, at the time of this recording, it may be an option an organization will consider when not wanting to utilize a preview feature. Basic logs come at a lower cost compared to analytics logs, but higher when compared to auxiliary logs. It helps ingest high volume, low value data into interactive retention for 30 days before going into long-term storage. So now we understand the different methods of ingesting data, we want to understand how to reduce the actual volume. Microsoft Sentinel gives you 2 ways to control this. First is the Log Ingestion API, which allows you to send custom format logs from any data source to your Microsoft Sentinel instance. These logs can either be stored in specific standard tables or custom tables that you create. You then create data collection rules, DCRs, to define, configure, and apply transformation to these data flows. The second approach is through data collection transformation. This method allows you to use data collection rules to apply basic KQL queries to incoming standard logs and certain types of custom logs before they land in your workspace. These methods are great to filter out irrelevant data to reduce the all-important total gigabyte ingestion value that determines your cost. While not required for most use cases, a different approach would be considered, such as a third party to help with data processing and transformation of data. Microsoft partners with Cribble for exactly this. Within their rich GUI, Cribble offers built-in data processing capabilities and functions that make it easy to manipulate, alter, and apply data transformations before ingesting into Microsoft Sentinel. In the addition to built-in functions, Cribble allows you to add new processes from scratch, giving you full control on the pipeline design. Last but definitely not least on ingestion is commitment tiers. Commitment tiers provide significant discounts on pay-as-you-go pricing. So if you know you'll be consistently ingesting over a certain threshold of analytics logs, then you can commit to that ingestion and receive the discount. The commitment tiers start at 100 gigabytes a day and go all the way up to 5 terabytes, with increasing discounts for the higher tiers. So that concludes the brief overview of Microsoft Sentinel ingestion. But now we have our data within our workspace, we want to understand what costs are involved in retention and how we can reduce them. Retention is great in Microsoft Sentinel because we can configure our choices down to the table level and apply different granular use cases. There's two states of retention: interactive retention or long-term storage. Interactive retention is what you would refer to as hot storage, and long-term storage would be considered cold. Interactive retention offers full functionality of data so that it can be used for detections and queries, while long-term storage offers less functionality and will take longer to query the data. With long-term storage, we can still query the data, but the cost of that is determined by the volume of data scanned with the query. You can query the data by using search jobs to bring back a result table. Now, the first 90 days of analytics logs is stored within interactive retention for free. From there, we can decide to pay and keep it within interactive retention for longer, or we can pay and move it into long-term storage for a significantly less cost. The choice here is yours to make based on your use cases. For data in long-term storage, we can query it via a KQL function called lookup or a search job. However, for data ingested via basic logs, if there was a need, such as during an active critical investigation, where we need our data within interactive retention, we can restore that data, but that does come at a cost of per gigabyte restored over time. In summary, interactive retention gives you full functionality at the fastest speeds, but by understanding your use cases, you can make decisions to save money by moving data into long-term storage where applicable to prevent unnecessary expenditure, but you'll always have the choice to restore data from basic logs when you need it. Automation is the last core piece of understanding the pricing, and it is actually the smallest cost. The automations within Microsoft Sentinel that are subject to cost are called playbooks, and playbooks are actually Azure Logic apps, and they use the same pricing model. Playbooks are charged per step ran, and there's 3 different types of steps: an action, a standard connector, or an enterprise connector. However, each of these steps cost a fraction of a penny to run. As a rule of thumb, an organization who is using full SOAR capabilities will likely not see automation being more than 3% of their total costs, which is one of the reasons we like Sentinel so much, because it's a SIEM with native SOAR that is relatively inexpensive. So that does conclude this session, and I'd like to thank you for your time. My biggest recommendation is to use the Azure pricing calculator when trying to understand what Sentinel will cost your organization, as it does a great job of breaking down what I've spoken about with real figures. I'd also recommend reading our documentation to understand more about the components that make up Microsoft Sentinel. Thank you.